Patty DeMoss.
Sharon Deavervoice.
Lee Deavervoice.
Joanne Drake.
Connie Mosher.
Edna Eckstein.
Thank you all for being here today, and I'm Eric Jensen, and this is an informative speech from my speech class. And today I'm going to be talking to you about Julius Caesar. And you wonder, why would I care about Julius Caesar? A lot of people don't care for history. History happens to be my favorite subject. And we learn a lot from history. We can look at history and discover problems that have been made in the past that perhaps we could avoid today. And one of those problems came through Julius Caesar, who was able to take a republic that was with an elected officials, an elected government, and turn it into a military dictatorship. How did he do this, and how did this happen? Very similar to what could happen perhaps in the United States of America. So let's begin to look at this amazing man, one of my favorite people in history, named Julius Caesar. Gaius Julius Caesar, he's remembered as one of the world's greatest military leaders in history, and he rose to be a dictator of the Roman Republic. And Julius Caesar rose to power on the wings of some very desperate economic and political reform needs of the Republic, very similar to what we actually see today in the United States, in our Republic of the United States of America today. And he was able to gain this permanent dictatorial power over Rome. And in preparing for this speech, I've had to use several credible sites from historical experts to pull together what was his life like, because the life of Julius Caesar is riddled with legend and myth about who he was. So we're going to stick to the facts today about Julius Caesar. And today I want to talk to you about, one, the decline of the Roman Republic. Second, Caesar's rise to power. Third, how Caesar was able to take power. And finally, the fourth point is how the family line of Julius Caesar was secured. So let's look at this amazing man who rose to power and changed a republic run by elected officials into a dictatorship. The first point that I have today is about the decline of the Roman Republic. See, long before the rise of Julius Caesar to power, the Roman Republic had been in rapid decline. There was a lot of similar conditions to what we see in our republic today. Rome began to focus on military conquest and to make sure they could secure their power and position in the region and in the world. And they were very successful at this. And as a result of their military success, there was a lot of wealth acquired and brought into the empire, including slaves. Now, these slaves and wealth largely helped the large landowners who were called the patricians. These were the wealthy of the society. And they became wealthier through the ownership of slaves. They could expand their plantations, and they could expand their income. And they became more and more powerful. Now, in the classical humanities book, it's a Metropolitan Community College custom edition, the author, Gloria Fierro, she says that while Rome's rich citizens grew richer, its poor citizens grew poorer. These patricians fiercely resisted all efforts to redistribute wealth more equally. Now, you've heard this term in our country lately, haven't you? Redistribution of wealth. So the wealthy completely resisted these efforts. And so eventually these patricians, because they began to gain more power and more influence, they gained control of the Senate through corruption. And eventually the army generals gained control over the Senate. Fierro goes on to say that ultimately Rome fell victim to the ambitions of army generals who, having conquered in the name of Rome, now turned to conquering Rome itself. And so in this atmosphere, this is the atmosphere where we have our second point today, Caesar's rise to prominence. Caesar was born about 100 BC, and softschools.com in Julius Caesar's timeline says Julius Caesar was born into a political family. His uncle was a famous general named Marius. And so after the death of Marius, Caesar's uncle, Caesar began his own military career, and he begins to rise to prominence. And he proves to be a very genius military leader, and he led his armies to victory in Gaul. And from the ushistory.org, Ancient Rome, it said that gaining support and popularity among the common people, Caesar also won the undying loyalty of his soldiers, who supplied him with the necessary muscle to seize his power. And so he was very popular, and he was a good general, and he was an amazing man. And so he had popularity with the people and in the populace itself. And so the next two events that propelled him to prominence were, number one, he had a very successful campaign for the consulship in 60 BC. He's become popular now. He's become a hero, and he's great militarily. And so now he's going to run for the Senate. And so Arthur Farrell on history.org says, rising rapidly, he campaigned successfully for the consulship in 60 BC. And he struck a deal with two of Rome's leading figures. These are leading historical figures now. And one was General Pompey and the Great and Caracas. And together, the three of them become known as the First Triumvirate, and they controlled Rome throughout the 50s BC. They became the control of Rome. And this led to the next point, that how Caesar could take power. In this atmosphere, Pharaoh goes on to say that Caesar and Pompey, after Crassus's death, went to war against one another in 49 BC. And at that time, Pompey, he gains control of the Senate through manipulation, through corruption. And so Pompey now is basically in charge of all of the Senate, the elected officials. He's controlling them. And they're his puppets. So at this point, Pompey orders Caesar to return to Rome, but without your army. So you can guess what probably he's planning to do. However, history.org article called Ancient Rome, it says, but when Caesar crossed the Rubicon River in northern Italy, he brought his army with him in defiance of the Senate's order. And Caesar then defeated Pompey's forces. He entered Rome triumphantly and unchallenged. He's popular. He's a hero in the country. He's done wonderful things. So in 44 BC, Julius Caesar orders the Senate to make him dictator for life. And they do. They do it. And once in power, Caesar now embarks on some very ambitious and needed economic and political reform. When he comes to power in Rome, the nation is in serious economic straits. The economy is all but ruined. There is such corruption in the government. There's great need for social reforms, with the rich being richer, the poor being poorer. This all sound familiar? What do you see in your news media today? With growing poverty, there's growing unemployment among the poorer classes. There's injustice, all the corruption. And Caesar embarks on the New Deal of his era. And he begins to do a lot of awesome things for the people. And Gloria Fiaro goes on to say that he codified laws, he regulates taxation, he reduced debts, he sent large numbers of the unemployed to overseas colonies, and he inaugurated this massive public work projects where he begins building great aqueducts and roads and all these things, very similar to the New Deal program that we had here in this country in the 30s. And one of the things he did, according to Julius Caesar's biography.com, he invited his political rivals to join him in government. This was his downfall. So all of these reforms are threatening the wealthy people who don't want to give up their power, and all these elites in the Senate. And in the biography.com, Julius Caesar, I found this, that a number of politicians saw Caesar as an aspiring king. And Romans had no desire for monarchical rule. Legend has it, according to biography.com, legend has it that it had been 5 centuries since they last allowed a king to rule them. So they were not happy about, many in the Senate were not happy about what they were seeing in this. Fierro goes on to say that a group of his opponents and former enemies in the Senate, led by Marcus Junius Brutus, assassinated him in the year 44 BCE. Now, ironically, this would be the turning point for the family line. It was actually Caesar's assassination which would solidify the future reign of his family and would ensure that there would be a permanent dictatorship in Rome, and it would become the end of the Republic as it was known before. Because instantly, Julius Caesar became a martyr. He's popular to the lower class. He's popular to the poor, who see the corruption, who see the rich as corrupt, who see those elite in the Senate as against them, and their hero has just been murdered by those individuals. Biography.com says a mob of lower and middle class Romans gathered at Caesar's funeral, with the angry crowd attacking the homes of Cassius and Brutus. Now, Caesar's grandnephew and his adopted son, Gaius Octavian, he jumps on the occasion. He takes advantage of this. And biography.com says that Octavian played on the late ruler's popularity. He assembles a large army to fight back the military troops who were defending Cassius and Brutus. And his victory over Cassius' assassins allowed Octavian, who assumed the name Augustus, to take power in 27 BC, and he becomes the first Roman emperor. Caesar's family now began to trace their legendary descent from Iulius, who was the legendary founder of Rome. Legend says he was descended from Iulius, who is the founder of Alba Longa, and son of Aeneas, and grandson of Venus and Anchises. And so they're going to play on this whole idea that he is a god type figure, that Julius Caesar is a god type figure. 2 years after his death, according to Julius Caesar's biography.com, Caesar became the first Roman figure to be deified. And the Senate also gave him the title, the Divine Julius. So Octavian now is going to rise up on the wings and on the shirt tails of his relative here, of his great uncle. He is going to rise up and he's going to take advantage of this legendary lineage and family connection to Caesar to secure his right to the throne and ensure that his family's future generations will be reigning, and he's going to assure his future family's generations of imperialism. And Fierro says that the Senate later bestowed on Octavian the title Augustus, or the Revered One. Thus, the fate of the Roman Republic was sealed. And the Roman Empire would forever be ruled by a military dictatorship. So we've examined the rise of Julius Caesar to power, the decline of the Roman Republic, Caesar's rise to prominence, how Caesar could take power, and how the family line was secure. Now, Caesar took advantage of political corruption in the government, of economic downfall and situations to manipulate the populace in order to be able to seize power in Rome. And he turned a republic into a dictatorship. In an article in the National Interest magazine on July 4th, 2014, titled Rome and America, A Shared Fate, author Robert W. Mary reminds us of this. For Americans today, it isn't enough merely to celebrate the glories of our system, which could so easily slip into a progressive erosion, and may already have done so. It is necessary further to appreciate the dangers posed when the country loses sight of the fundamentals of our system that are the hallmark of its success. Carefully prescribed government, an equilibrium of separate powers, minority rights and protections, the ethos of liberty. All those things were manifest in the early Roman Republic, and all dissolved over time until the Republic had lost its relevance. And so, inevitably, Romans lost their Republic. Now, let me just tell you that we need to learn lessons of history. History is important to us. And if it can happen in Rome, it can happen in America. Thank you very much for listening today.